Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement's Liberation Summer School. And we're about to get ready to rock it with some important information. But first of all, I got to share with you who we are and what the principles of unity are. Um, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, we believe in defending the human rights of African people, and that cannot be underscored. We're at hot and critical times, and more than ever, we need to elevate to the world all levels of what human rights means, and the fact that it is everyone's obligation to fight for those rights. Secondly, we demand reparations. What does reparations mean? It means basically repair of the harm that has been done to African people. We're all familiar with the transatlantic slave trade. We are familiar with the Arab slave trade. We're familiar with the ongoing badges and incidents of slavery right now up until today. We demand reparations for all of the above. We promote self-determination. What does that mean? It means that we as a people have a right to our own destiny. We have a right to our autonomy and a right to our sovereignty. It means we have a right to our nation and create the ability to create a nation state where the human rights of the human family are respected and honored. We oppose genocide. That's one of the things that we know that is being experienced in right now in Gaza, but it's also in the Sudan, it's in Haiti, it's in the Congo. And one of the things I would challenge all of us to do is to go ahead and research the Genocide Convention, because too often when we think about genocide, we only think about the mass atrocities, but part of the language says in whole and in part. So even Hurricane Katrina uh, was acts of genocide against our people. Separating our children or anybody's children are acts of genocide. All I'm saying is we need to go ahead and be about the business and go ahead and study and understand the full impact of genocide. And I should say this, one of the persons who really created the principle of genocide also included colonization as part of that definition. So we have to make certain that we include all the necessary information. Next, we demand the release of all political prisoners, prisoners of war, and political exiles. And we still have exiles outside of the U.S. empire's borders. We have exiles in Cuba. We have exiles on the continent of Africa and other places. But I think it's also important to note that as we study, we should recognize that when we look at political prisoners, that definition needs to acknowledge that those of us who are under assault based on our political beliefs, and if we're incarcerated, we're political prisoners. It's also important for us to note that prisoners of war is that designation is acknowledgement that we have soldiers who have been caught in the battle, and we should also note that under international law, we are supposed to be tried by an international court. So all I'm really trying to say is that we are living in a system where illegality is the order of practice here in the empire and other places where African people and other peoples of color, oppressed and exploited people are fighting. Lastly, it says we struggle to end gender and sexual oppression. We need to be very clear that Africa has had a diversity of sexualities, and that's something that we have to challenge our masses to understand and understand that I think Jomo sort of says this little phrase, we be what we be. The bottom line is that all people, irrespective of how they present themselves, need to be recognized and such, and recognized and be appreciated for who they are and who they present themselves to be. We have a right to respect that, a right to respect that. And if we're really understanding what human rights are, it includes their right of self-expression. I think it's also important for us to share what the 7 aspects of the Malcolm X grassroots personality. And you have to forgive me. A lot of the younger folks say MXGM. I think it's important sometimes for us to spell it out, the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And in understanding that, what all that means, it is incorporated in terms of these principles. Like the first one says, always be humble when dealing with African people. You can be humble and firm at the same time. I interpret this to say that arrogance has no place in our movement, no place in society, no place into the world. We as a people can learn from everybody. We learn from nature. We learn from the animals. The point is that particularly as organizers, being arrogant, all it'll do is just turn folks away and shut their hearing down from listening to the message that ultimately is a message to help them to understand that there is a pathway for them to be able to contribute to the movement of liberation of our people and our nation and other peoples of the world. Number two, respect the actions and customs of others. We have certain cultural mores and values. Other people have cultural mores and values. And part of understanding a right of people's self-determination is understand that other people have other ways of living, other ways of presenting themselves, other ways of governing themselves, other ways of expressing of their culture or their spirituality. And respecting the actions and the customs of others means ultimately it's about that African principle of reciprocity. It means that it's incumbent upon them to respect our traditions and how we present ourselves. Number three, never engage in petty, senseless arguments. I need to re-say that. Never engage in petty and senseless arguments. All that means is that if you're engaging, it means that we have to check our shallowness. We need to be able to understand that we have a lot of work to do, a lot of serious work to do, and we don't have time to be engaged in any kind of foolishness because that's not going to advance the issues and the movement, the strategy and tactics that our movement is developing to be able to liberate our people. Number four, don't go places looking for arguments, ideological or otherwise. In many respects, that is pretty much tied to the three previous. It means that we should obviously know who we are ideologically and be able to express it. But it's not about a contest to say, my strategy is better than your strategy, my tactics is better than your strategy. That goes back to the whole issue of reinforcing that all it is petty. We cannot win allies or create solidarity if we're going to just be looking for a fight. And in many respects, I think John Henry Clark says something to the effect of allow one's knowledge and information speak for itself. Speak for itself. Number five, it says, never be afraid to wage ideological struggle or ask questions if necessary to establish political clarity. There's no such thing as a dumb question. If we don't understand, it's important for us to go ahead and seek clarity. Also, in terms of waging ideological struggle, be very clear. Sometimes ideology in itself is a growing energy, if you will. It helps us to be able to say, well, sometimes if we look back in the ideology that was formed, say 50 or 60 years ago, there are errors that very well might be present, but only if we struggle in sincerity and in integrity, we can be able to go ahead and get the kind of clarity and tighten up that those ideological positions that need to be advanced. Number 6, it says never talk to be seen or heard. Goes back to the ego. We need to be able to understand that it ain't about I want to be the star, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. It's about allowing the message to be heard. It's about allowing the message to be seen, because that is what we want. We want to be able to make certain that our message and our political clarity and the ideology is going to resonate with the people. And believe it or not, the folks in the barbershops and the beauty shops and those in the streets or whatever, if they see you just ego tripping, what they're going to do, they're going to shut you down, even though what you have learned and what you can teach very well might have some value to them. It's going to shut them down. Number 7 says practice criticism and self-criticism. Well, my experience has always been, it's good to critique ourselves, but also it's important to be able to allow and listen to the critiques of other folks, because sometimes we have people, friends and comrades, Rafiki Askaris, who hesitate to criticize based on love. But the reality is that being your own critic will take some of the impact of the criticism, because we all learn from criticism. We all learn from critiques. Nobody is above. It's like when I'm writing a presentation, I might go through that graph 4 or 5 different times, give it to somebody else and smoke it over just to be able to see the error. So in some respects, I want to tie that to always practice criticism and self-criticism. And self-criticism, I think, is really best, because it means that you are being introspective, and that is going to prepare you for being able to be a better person in terms of being able to relate to the masses, but also being able to relate to our families too. Because sometimes we forget that we need to be able to educate those in our families. I believe maybe this is the time that I'm supposed to introduce our speaker. And what I want to say is, we know the topic because it's there, is that from Attica to Gaza, the intersections between the Palestinian and Black prison movements by Dr. Orisanmi Burton. But what I want to do is go through his biography, because I think this is important for us to be able to know who he is and how important and how valuable he is in terms of his presentation. He is the assistant professor of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's into anthropology. He also has that's what his doctorate is from. He also has a Master of Library Science, but also a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies. Heavy weight. But I want to throw something else out there. He's got a new book. It's called The Tip of the Spear: Black Radicalism, Prison Repression, and the Long Attica Revolt. Is a radical interpretation of Attica, the revolutionary 70s uprising that galvanized abolitionist movements and transformed prisons. There's a lot more that I think we need to say, but I want to go back just a minute to a synopsis of the of who he is. He describes himself as a social anthropologist working in the United States. He says, "My research examines imbrication." I need to slow down and pause for a minute. imbrication. I need to define it, and I think it's important for us to define these words. It refers to the state of being arranged in an overlapping or shingle-like manner. It describes the way objects like tiles, scales, and even sediment particles can be layered with edges that partially cover each other. This is a pattern that can be observed in various contexts, from archaeological designs to geological formations. That says a whole lot. It says that he's doing an extremely deep dive into the analysis of his work. And I would encourage people to go ahead and buy that book. I happened to listen to an interview of him earlier today where, and I think this is significant too. He had acknowledged that he had been in conversation with Baba Jalil Muntaqim, and who initially talked about this prison within the context of war. Hear me, prison within the context of war. What it brought to my mind was, for example, the Republic of Africa 11, where at one point in the Erlang trial, they had charged the 11 with wagering war against the state of Mississippi. I'm also reminded of the Nigerian author of The West and the Rest of Us, Tinwesu, who talked about enslavement is a war against nations. All I'm really trying to point out is that when we get into his subject matter, we need to really pay attention, pull out our notepads, and really bring it on. I don't want to take too much more time with this introduction, and he didn't want me to probably drop all that on you, but I want to say this, is that it's important for us to understand what counterinsurgency is, and that's where we're at right now, and really begin to learn and, like I said, take notes. But what I want to ask before I bring him on is I would like for him to share with us what the meaning is of his names, because I believe there's a contextual relationship between the naming of African people and how they show up in terms of their work. I believe his first name means the deities preserve me, but he might have a different or an expanded meaning of his name, but also his last name, his family name, I'm certain also has currency. So given that, I'm hoping I didn't put too much on you, but it's all yours now.
Peace. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. It's an honor. Um, yeah, the name conversation is actually, it's a long conversation. Brief. So most people call me Ori. My name is pronounced Orisanmi. Most people call me Ori. Ori has a lot of different meanings. The deepest meaning, quickly described, would be consciousness, right? Your inner consciousness. It's a Yoruba name. Yorubas believe that every person they walk around with their own individual deity, which is called your Ori. And this is something that you can actually cultivate through different processes. And so my name means strong Ori, or beautiful destiny, or powerful destiny, or powerful consciousness. That's what the name means. And I actually have 5 names, and all of them have a story. And maybe we can talk about that sometimes. But again, I appreciate the invitation and the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. I have some rather provisional slides that I put together just so you would have something to look at. So let me pull that up. Yeah, it's an honor to talk about Black August. I definitely wanted to bring the question of Palestine and the Palestinian prison movement into dialogue with the Black prison movement. And of course, Black August emerges from this need to nurture the living legacy of Black revolutionary struggle that's emerging from within the prison. So let me just briefly say that obviously we're witnessing this intensified genocide in Gaza and throughout Palestine at this moment, but the seeds for this research that I'm going to talk to you about were actually planted in 2018 when I visited the West Bank and Jerusalem, and I had an opportunity to present on my research, which I did in an amphitheater, an outdoor amphitheater in Ramallah, and it was an amazing experience because it was popular, it was widely attended by an intergenerational group, an audience. Um, who listened intently. And then following my presentation, I talked about, the New York City Jail Rebellion of 1970, which is chapter one of Tip of the Spear, my book. And, after my presentation, I got to witness this really intense dialogue and like a political debate. I mean, you talked about the different principles of MXGM. Ideological struggle was on full display. And what became clear to me was how intensely people of different generations had studied the Black liberation movement, um, and how intensely they were struggling to apply those lessons to their own context. And it was one of the most rich conversations I had ever had about my research anywhere. And so that's what really planted the seed for me to think, okay, this relationship and this overlap needs to be excavated. So I've been working on that for a number of years. I'm still working on it. It's not complete, but I wanted to kind of share some of that with you today. So we'll begin with Comrade George, because of course it's Black August. Um, let's see. Um, And so this is a commemoration of his life in the September 25th, 1971 edition of the Black Panther, which features this poem entitled Enemy of the Sun. And one particularly poignant stanza reads, You may take, let me see if I can yeah. You may take the last strip of my land, feed my youth to prison cells. You may plunder my heritage. You may burn my books, my poems, or feed my flesh to the dogs. You may spread a web of terror on the roofs of my village, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins I shall resist. So editors of the Black Panther initially attributed this ode of anti-colonial resistance to Jackson, but in a subsequent edition of the Black Panther newspaper, they revealed that it was actually authored by Palestinian resistance poet Samia al-Qasim and they issued a formal apology. Black studies scholar Greg Thomas found that an anthology of Palestinian resistance poetry, which went by the same name, Enemy of the Sun, was one of the 99 books recovered from Jackson's cell after he was assassinated. Greg Thomas speculates that Jackson likely hand copied the poem onto loose sheets of paper with the intent of distributing them as part of his ongoing efforts to politicize the prison population in California. Rather than framing this incident as an editorial error, however, Thomas describes it as a quote, revelation, a sign of radical identification and uncanny connection beyond rhetorical declarations of solidarity. Indeed, the Panthers' apology challenged individualistic notions of sole authorship on the basis that Black people in the internal colonies of the United States, Palestinians under Zionist settler colonialism, and oppressed people all over the world were facing similar conditions. They wrote in their apology, quote, in a larger sense, it was written by Comrade George. It was written by all those who struggled and are continuing to struggle against this racist corporative empire. It has been written in the struggles, the blood and tears of all who are oppressed. And as George felt, we are all enemies of those who are enemies of the sun. those who would maintain this monstrous oppression of the peoples of the world, end quote. So I wanted to start there, but really what I'm doing is tracing the synergies between US and Zionist carceral regimes or as they evolved over the second half of the 20th century. And I'm also going to talk about the political intersections between Palestinian and Black anti-carceral analysis and strategy, with the aim of revealing how these struggles are organically linked through transnational circuits of repression and rebellion. And the aim is, again, to nurture this living tradition of anti-colonial solidarity, in this case, Black and Palestinian solidarity, which I understand through the Aboriginal proverb, quote, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together, end quote. So that's how I understand solidarity. That's why I think solidarity is important. Um, While the argument I'm making emphasizes the synergies, right, it's important to understand that these struggles emerge from unique historical and political contexts, right? So the United States, like Israel, is a settler colony, and it therefore aims to replace its indigenous population with an invasive settler society. But unlike Palestinians, Black people are not native to the land upon which we remain held captive. Rather, we are descendants of captured African prisoners of war, kidnapped from our native land, forced into slavery throughout the Western Hemisphere. As Sundiata Acoli, veteran of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, has written, the Black prison struggle is situated along a continuum of over 400 centuries of resistance to this war. The Palestinian prisoners movement is of more recent vintage, but like the struggles of other indigenous people in what are now known as the United States, Canada, Hawaii, Australia, among others, it grows out of a deep and continuous connection with the land. Palestinian anthropologist Ishmael Nashif locates the roots of the Palestinian prison struggle in the arrest and imprisonment of Palestinians and other Arabs who were building an incipient nationalist movement during World War I, the final years of the Ottoman Empire and its rule over historic Palestine. The nationalist movement intensified during the British Mandate period, culminating in the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, during which the British incarcerated thousands of Palestinians, subsequently expanding its repressive capacity by constructing more than 50 prisons and military fortifications, many of which would later be refurbished into institutions of Zionist domination. But I actually want to zoom ahead to 1967, which is a pivotal year for both US and Zionist carceral regimes. So there's a lot that we're skipping over, but I wanted to try to make this as relevant as possible for the conversation around Black August. Um, so in 1967, an event occurred that Palestinians called the Naksa, or the setback, when an Israeli military operation seized the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Sinai Peninsula, and Gaza from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria, occupying these territories in violation of the UN Resolution 181 of 1947. So this is an image of the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim holy site in occupied East Jerusalem. And this illegal act, right, of territorial expansion, the Naksa, increased the population of Israel by roughly 1.5 million Palestinians, or one-third of the total population, who suddenly found themselves residing within a hostile territory. Narrating this new dynamic through a burgeoning Palestinian nationalist ideology, the founding statement of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine noted, quote, the entire mass of our Palestinian people live today for the first time since the catastrophe of 1948 on a completely occupied Palestinian territory, confronting a rapacious enemy face to face, and we now must take up this challenge to its conclusion, or we must accept or surrender to the ambitions of the enemy and the daily humiliation of our people and absorbed fortunes of our lives. So one of the things that happened in 1967 was the creation of Military Order 101, which criminalized virtually all forms of Palestinian resistance in the newly occupied territories, including modest gestures of collective identity, such as waving a flag, both of which are punishable by imprisonment. So we don't have really up-to-date statistics on the prisons in Israel, Palestine, but according to the best available data, more than 1 million Palestinians, including tens of thousands of children, have been incarcerated by the IPS. That's a term I'll be using. The IPS, Israeli Prison Service, since 1967. And roughly 40% of all Palestinian men will be incarcerated at some point during their lifetime. Parallel to developments in Palestine, the year 1967 saw the intensification of carceral repression in the United States. The Federal Bureau of Investigation revitalized its secret counterintelligence program, first established to crush the Communist Party USA into a weapon against the Black liberation struggle, the American Indian movement, and the broader New Left. Alongside anti-subversive units based in municipal police forces, the FBI destabilized social movements through a range of covert actions, including disinformation, divide and conquer tactics, political incarceration, and assassinations. The year 1967 was also the year that the CIA launched Operation Chaos, which aimed to sever links between social movements in the United States and those abroad, with a particular focus on the growing connection between the Black Panther Party and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO. I wanted to highlight one COINTELPRO operation that's especially relevant here, and this is an operation from 1969 when the FBI attempted to incite uh, Mayor Kahane to act violently against the BPP, right? A year earlier, Kahane had founded a proto-fascist organization called the Jewish Defense League, which ironically drew inspiration from the Black Panther Party and other Black nationalist formations in its effort to build a militant Zionist movement in the United States. The Bureau drafted, this is the cover letter to a fake letter which the Bureau drafted, purportedly from a quote, concerned Negro World War II veteran who claimed to have overheard his son and several Panthers plotting to extort and bomb Jewish-owned businesses. You can see in the last paragraph, it says, uh, it is felt that this contact should not be limited to the furnishing of factual information of interest to the aims of the Jewish Defense League, because the New York office does not feel that the JDL could be motivated to act as called for in reference to the Bureau letter if the information gathered by the New York office concerning anti-Semitism and other matters were furnished to that organization without some embellishment. So they just put in print, we're gonna lie. Um, so when this letter was written, the JDL had already launched armed attacks against several diplomatic offices in the US and personnel, right? And so they were recognized as a terrorist organization. What I also found, and this is fascinating, that Mayor Kahane was also a FBI and CIA asset. So this is one of their assets, like a spy, who they're secretly manipulating also, which is just really interesting. And this, of course, gives us some more historical context to the cynical use of anti-Semitism as a weapon against Black resistance. The last thing I'll say is that eventually Kahane gets arrested for terrorism, for bomb plots, but he's not imprisoned. He's allowed to immigrate to Israel, where he moved and continued to engage in terrorism, and actually ended up founding the Koch Party, which is a far-right Zionist fascist organization that's very much alive today, right? So this is highly relevant. Okay, so I'm going to move to a conversation about prison exchanges, the politics of prison exchanges. Um, So in 1969, Marxist-Leninist Carlos Maragella authored the Mini Manual of Urban Guerrilla Warfare as part of a broader struggle against a US-backed military dictatorship in Brazil. Among other tactics, the manual advocated the use of kidnapping to, quote, exchange or liberate imprisoned revolutionary comrades or to force suspension or torture in the jail cells of the military dictatorship, end quote. Marigella's manual, which was closely studied by militant groups as well as by the state, named a political trend that was already in process. During the summer of the previous year, three members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine hijacked a flight en route to Tel Aviv and diverted it to Algiers. Over the next 40 days, with the aid of Algerian officials, the militants negotiated a deal with the Israeli government to exchange the 12 Israeli hostages under their control for the release of 16 captives held in Israeli prisons. Incarcerated since the 1967 Nakba, these Palestinian and other Arab captives were subsequently released into Jordan. This episode marked the first instance of a prisoner exchange between the PLO and the Israeli government and helped usher in a new wave of political kidnappings and prisoner exchanges. These activities proliferated throughout Latin America, where the media reported that 18 successful or attempted such actions happened between January and August of 1970. In March of that year, Dominican militants kidnapped a white U.S. Air Force attaché named Lieutenant Colonel Donald Crowley, and exchanged him for 20 prisoners held captive for contesting the island nation's US-backed military dictatorship. While this incident, like the 1968 PFLP prisoner exchange, was resolved through negotiation, political kidnappings often ended in bloodshed. Such was the case on August 10, 1970, when the body of Daniel Mitrione was found riddled with bullets. The former Indiana police chief had been tapped by the Office of Public Safety, actually working under the cover of the CIA, working on behalf of the CIA, to provide quote, technical assistance to the Uruguayan government when he was kidnapped by a Marxist-Leninist formation called the Tupamaros. The guerrillas proposed to exchange Mitrione and other captives for 150 of their political prisoners, but when the deadline expired, they followed through on his promise to execute him. Um, Interestingly enough, this is happening right when the New York City jail rebellion is happening. So if you look at the newspapers that are talking about the New York City jail rebellion of 1970, which is a black prison rebellion, on one page they're talking about the New York City jail rebellion. On the other page, they're talking about Mitrione. Um, Assessing this trend in a congressional report, the conservative House Internal Security Committee wrote that basically they said we must not be lulled into feeling that this can't happen here. So as he followed these developments from a New York prison cell, Martin Sostra reached the conclusion that not only could it happen here, but that it should. Over the past year, Sostra had been struggling to identify how the Black liberation movement could effectively reverse the swelling population of U.S. political prisoners, given that it lacked the capacity to free them via direct military action and had no captured enemy agents or soldiers to exchange. For Sostra, this question was a matter of life and death, given that he himself was a political prisoner. In the summer of 1968, with the aid of the FBI, the New York State Police had framed him for distributing heroin out of his popular Afro-Asian bookstore. Even the title of his bookstore is another nod to solidarity. Um, the fact that the PFLP action involved cooperation between Palestinians, Algerians, and Jordanians inspired Sostra to propose that Black people in the United States forge a mutual assistance agreement with their allies in the Third World. Under the proposed agreement, Sostra opined that, quote, an Egyptian or Syrian freedom fighter captured by Israel can be exchanged for an American pilot captured in North Vietnam. An Israeli officer captured by the Egyptians in the Sinai can be exchanged for an Afro-American freedom fighter captured by the oppressor in Oakland, California, end quote. Sostra located a photograph, which I wish I had, which I would show it to you, but I don't, revealing that most of the Dominicans involved in the kidnapping of Lieutenant Crowley were Black. This revelation was highly significant for Sostra, given his advocacy that Black Americans adopt the tactic. But beyond the fact itself, what was even more significant was that this detail was, quote, deliberately suppressed by the controlled press to conceal from the Black revolutionaries in the US the vanguard guerrilla tactics being employed by Black revolutionaries in the Dominican Republic to free their captured brothers. Engaging in a form of guerrilla media analysis, Sostra argued that this omission was part of a racist pattern in which the press intentionally obscured the racial dynamics of anti-imperialist struggle. This policy of suppressing news of Black insurgency occurring in other world fronts of the revolutionary struggle against the common racist imperialist enemy, this is a quote, has deprived U.S. Black revolutionaries of valuable knowledge concerning effective guerrilla tactics employed by Black urban guerrillas in other world fronts, which can be incorporated in the Black liberation struggle within the U.S. That's the end of the quote. So I'm sharing all of this because I think it gives some much needed context to one of the most well-known sort of moments in terms of Black August, right? Which is Jonathan Jackson's August 7th, 1970 raid on the Marin County Courthouse, um, where he, laid siege to the courthouse, gave firearms to three Black political prisoners who were in court, James McLean, William Christmas, and Ruchell McGee, and took several people hostages, including a judge and a district attorney. But before they could escape onto Highway 101, members of the criminal conspiracy section of the Los Angeles Police Department, who had foreknowledge of the plan, right, opened fire into the van. A shootout ensued, killing Jackson, McLean, Christmas, and the judge. Several others sustained severe injuries. Evidence suggests that Jonathan Jackson's raid was the opening salvo in an audacious plot to exchange the hostages for George Jackson and for all of them to escape to Cuba on a hijacked plane. The elder Jackson neither confirmed nor denied the existence of a wider plot and refused to frame his brother's action as a failure. Rather, he emphasized that Jonathan's attack on the courthouse, in which no justice was possible, that's a quote, challenged the prestige of the state. According to George, the major barrier to Black revolution was that people were in awe of the aura, the magic, the glamour, the luster, and the splendid permanence of the state that covers fascists like a protective layer of fat. His brother's act of counterviolence exposed the vulnerable underbelly of the state and in doing so invited others to engage in similarly bold acts. He uplifted his brother as a martyr, maintaining that although he was killed, his spirit lived on. Quote, Jonathan is calling from his grave, adding another voice to the many thunderous graveyard affirmations, which for us Blacks speeds the revolution to its ultimate issue. That's the end of the quote. Um, and so this is an example of the Black liberation movement's experiment with prisoner exchanges. It's not the only example. And this has been an ongoing strategy employed by Palestinians as well. All right. Attica is all of us is the name of the next section. Let me see if I can, there we go. 3 weeks after George Jackson was assassinated, which was a year after his brother was assassinated, a rebellion erupted in Attica. So this image was created by Akil Al-Jundi, who was one of the Attica rebels, a survivor of the Attica massacre. And it was also created by Laura Whitehorn, who is a white anti-imperialist activist, was a member of Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground. She's a co-founder of Release Aging People in Prison. I'm repping them right now, aka RAP. Encourage folks to check them out. They're doing great work. Um, and I think there's a lot in this image. So first you see that it's titled Attica, right? But then on the left, you see a list of all these other prison rebellions that had erupted. And so this really supports my analysis of the long Attica revolt, that Attica is not a singular event that just happened in one prison, but that it's a movement, that it's temporally extended and geographically broad, that it traversed different sites, right? And then if you look at the bottom, it says support all national liberation struggles, right? So this is an internationalist articulation of Attica's meaning. Um, and I think that it's really important that we remember that and not allow our movements to be sort of uh, sort of compressed into these different enclaves or distorted as though they have this sort of narrow focus that can be easily absorbed and co-opted by the state. Um, so these sort of dreams of anti-carceral internationalist solidarity began to materialize during Attica, right? And so I talk in the book about how some of the Attica survivors talked via letters to Vietnamese resistance fighters who wrote them letters where they're citing Angela Davis and George Jackson, and that the Attica brothers are sending letters back to them through their lawyers, right? And one of their letters says, quote, all those who have taken an active stand against fascism, imperialism, racism, and injustice have been our impetus as you've made the concept of liberation a reality. Adding that the Palestinians and others fighting for self-determination have been their inspiration, right? In the wake of Attica, a California prison official, his name is Donald Bordenkircher, who used to work in San Quentin, and his job, I think he might have had something to do with George Jackson's assassination in 1967, right? That year that I've been talking about, he's tapped by the Office of Public Safety, right? Again, working as a cover for the CIA to go to prisons in South Vietnam, where he helps um, develop and reform those prisons to help crush the nationalist movement in Vietnam. Um, and he talks about how in Vietnam, after Attica, the Attica demands were translated into the Vietnamese language and circulated throughout prisons on Con Song Island in Vietnam. So this same guy, Donald Bordenkircher, then is sent back to the US where he helps the FBI develop a anti-radical prison program. And then years later, in like 2006, he's deployed to Iraq, where he's sent to manage the fallout from the U.S. torture scandal in Vietnam, in Abu Ghraib. And of course, the actual people who did the torturing at Abu Ghraib, many of them had been former U.S. prison guards before they deployed militarily, right? So these connections are material connections. It's not an abstract notion of solidarity. There's like an actual material infrastructure that I'm identifying here, right? And so it solidarity is not an option, and thinking narrowly is not an option for us because our enemies aren't thinking that way. Anyway. So people can hear me talk about Attica. There's lectures around circulating. People have heard of Attica. Many of you probably don't know that on September 30th, 1971, less than 3 weeks after Attica, a rebellion broke out in Ashkelon prison. Located on the southwestern coast of historic Palestine, roughly 12 miles north of Gaza, the prison had been the headquarters of the British Army during the Mandate period. And in the wake of the Nakba, Ashkelon was converted into a site for the incarceration, interrogation, and torture of Palestinian militants. A 1971 article in a Hebrew language magazine described Ashkelon as hell, noting, quote, They are held in their cells as beasts in their cages 23 hours a day, 20 more to a cell. Prisoners transferred healthy and upright from Ramleh, which is another prison, go back to Ramleh a few weeks after, broken, destroyed, and silent, end quote. Amid the Ashkelon rebellion's aftermath, the commissioner of the Israeli prison service appeared on television to inform the public that news of the Attica rebellion had reached Ashkelon's captives and may have sparked the uprising. Okay, so one thing I want to say is that it's important that we never take prison officials at their word. So he could very well be lying to minimize the extent of autonomous intelligence and agency that the Palestinian captives had, or to minimize the brutality of the conditions. This is something that happens with our political prisoners, where people say, oh, they got that idea from somewhere else, right? It's this outside agitator trope, which basically um, assumes that people aren't intelligent enough to analyze their own conditions and make their own decisions politically. So that might be at play here, but whether or not it's true, it actually doesn't matter, because what this statement demonstrates is that Nur understood that these things were connected, right? Whether or not they got, word of Attica and rebelled, Nur made the connection. He sees the connection, right? And so we need to also understand that connection. Okay. Like Attica, the Ashkelon rebellion emerged out of a long history of struggle. So most of the captives in Ashkelon were politically active prior to 1967 and were probably captured as a result of the Nakba. And like political prisoners in the US, their activity didn't cease once they were behind prison walls, right? Like Attica, the Ashkelon rebellion was sparked by the beating of a prisoner, in this case, a blind man named Mahmoud Abu Danesh. But also, like Attica, Ashkelon's captives had been experimenting with various forms of resistance. So, for example, in July of 1970, more than a year before the rebellion, 540 Ashkelon captives launched a hunger strike, one of the few forms of resistance available to people who were subjected to such a profound asymmetry of power. At precisely the same time, captives in the New York City jail system were on a hunger strike and articulated a similar set of demands, and those in Attica were on a labor strike. Um, So these movements are developing along similar lines. And these developments, I think, give new meaning to the phrase that often was uttered by the survivors of Attica, which is Attica is all of us, right? And I think this really speaks to one of the key insights of the Black radical prison movement, which is that the prison is a microcosm of the world outside the walls, right? In some ways it's foreshadowing the future of people outside the walls. That's why it needs to be opposed so militantly, right? Because they argued that the prison is a concentrated site of fascism, and that if it isn't contested, it's going to grow and metastasize beyond prison walls. And this is the argument they were making 50 years ago, before the term fascism is, suddenly we're in the grips of fascism, but they had warned about this, and they were experiencing this 50 years ago. So Attica is all of us. So I think I want to just wrap up by bringing up one more point really briefly. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff I could talk about, but I just want to make this point. I sorry. Well, since it's here, I'll mention this. This is a Palestinian saying, political prisoners are the compass of our struggle. And I think that resonates with a lot of folks, especially folks who are moved by Black August. But one of the things, um, yeah, let me leave it at that. I'll just put that out there because it's a powerful statement. Political prisoners are the compass of our struggle. I just want to leave by just mentioning this, right? And I want to encourage people to look this up. So Matulu Shakur, right? Rest in power, key figure in the Republic of New Africa, the BLA, the Lincoln Detox Program, Dr. Matulu Shakur, acupuncturist. He co-wrote with a lot of other co-authors an essay called Genocide Waged Against the Black Nation. It's got a much longer title. You can find it on the Freedom Archive, the full version. It's also anthologized in Joy James's book, Imprisoned Intellectuals. And I just want to give you a summary of that, a really brief summary of that, alongside a really brief summary of Molding Consciousness or the Re-Identification of Torture, which is an essay written in 2010 by Walid Daka, who's a martyred political prisoner in Palestine who passed away last year. Um, Dr. Matulu Shakur's essay, right? So first, I think it's important to say, and this is similar to what Dr. Kwame said at the intro, that Dr. Shakur's essay extends a long tradition of Black radical theorizing around the question of genocide, going all the way back to the Civil Rights Congress of 1951 and their petition, We Charge Genocide. But Dr. Shakur was talking about the context of genocide within and through the Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois, which is a total lockdown supermax prison. And he and his co-author and a lot of our PPs, Black, Puerto Rican, Independistas, a lot of our freedom fighters were held there. Shakur and his co-authors maintained that Marion employed hidden techniques that amounted to a war of attrition, a war that is, quote, designed to reduce prisoners to a state of submission, essential for their ideological conversion. That's a quote. He also claimed that these techniques emerged from, quote, research conducted by government scientists and counterinsurgency agents who studied the theories and works of past experts in the fields of behavior therapy, behavior modification, insurgency, and low-intensity warfare. Moreover, he stressed that Marion's carceral regime targeted Black political prisoners as part of a broader strategy meant to destroy Black nationalist consciousness within and outside prison walls, and argued that this strategy was tantamount to genocide. So he argued that in 1988 in the US. Walid Daka was writing in a totally different time, 2010, a totally different place, Palestine, and through a different cultural lens, but the texts bear striking resemblance. So in Daka's essay, he identifies a shift in the management of Zionist prisons in the wake of the Second Intifada. He talks about IPS administrators waging a hidden and shapeless war against all Palestinians by attempting to mold the consciousness of the fighting elite locked in prison. So it's the same, targeting the revolutionaries as a way to shape the consciousness of people outside prison walls. He also mobilizes an argument that echoes the Black radical critique of prisons, that prisons are just an intensification of the oppression on the outside, which is really, I mean, we can trace that to Malcolm X, but even before. But DACA identifies Zionist prisons as zones that intensify the normal condition of Palestinian existence, in which, quote, citizens are closed off in separate geographic enclaves, just as prisoners are isolated from one another in wings and in sectors totally dependent upon the will of the jailer. Daka argues that professionals and experts in the social sciences and psychological warfare were using Zionist prisons as well as black sites in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay as a, quote, laboratory where policies targeting the Palestinian moral and social situations are tested. His conclusion is that prisons have been specifically designed to destroy the Palestinian mind and spirit. As such, they're part of a broader Zionist strategy of politicide. Politicide is a subcategory of genocide. So both of them are saying the same thing. Two different hemispheres, decades apart, two different prisons, right? But they're both saying that these techniques are developed by academics, by scholars who are cooking these ideas up in universities and laboratories and testing them out on prisoners. So I'm doing more research on this. I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. I guess I'll just end by just talking briefly about uh, um, Chris Smalls, um, and his attempt to get aid into Gaza right now, which is of course an open air prison. Um, And the fact that that Freedom Flotilla was intercepted, that everyone was arrested, that he in particular was singled out for specific brutality because he was Black, which highlights the white supremacy embedded in this regime, that he was beaten, that he was incarcerated in Givon prison. Um, which sometimes gets called the slaughterhouse. It's in West Jerusalem. I've seen that prison. I saw that prison. So I just wanted to sort of bring that out to show that this is yet another chapter in this ongoing kind of saga of the interrelation of these two regimes. And so given that it's Black August, and given all this going on, I wanted to try to offer this historical context and this analysis in hopes that it helps us all um, clarify what it is that we're up against so that we know how to fight. Thank you.
That was extremely excellent presentation. I'm trusting that the audience has a number of questions they want to ask you. I appreciate the clarity in terms of the parallel struggles that the Palestinian population has with the New African population. So I really appreciate your presentation and the work. And before I guess we get to some of the questions, I want to share with you that I do remember, for example, Attica, and fortunately, I was able to meet Big Black, who was one of the persons who was a part of the Attica struggle. He came to Chicago to act as a consultant on the Pontiac case. So when you had the large poster and it had Pontiac, well, that was the Pontiac Rebellion where they were attempting to commit to death 16 Black men, and this I think was the most recent, largest Black but death penalty case in the entire state. Baba Shokwe Lumumba ancestor was one of the lawyers, and fortunately, we were able to win that case. But you mentioned the issue of torture. One of the things that I recall in particular is that the legal defense team and the community had to literally meet right next door to the death penalty chair. And so that was obviously, as you would know, designed to really rattle both the defense and community teams, but as well as the inmates themselves. You also had Stateville, for example. I happened to do some work also in Stateville, where I think you had mentioned the Puerto Rican independence movement. At the time that I was doing some work at Stateville, you had two of the FLN members who were also present there, and I was summarily barred from going back into the institution because they had found a flyer in one of the cells where one of the Puerto Rican supporters in Chicago, we were also speaking against the federal grand jury. So all I wanted to say is that it just brings a lot of memories. And so I'm hoping that we have some questions.
Let me jump in real quick. We have
Please.
to move towards close. So we don't have time to take questions, unfortunately. We have to get over to the other school, to the courses.
Well, John Moe said, I guess it's in your department, but I want to say in closing, for you, Dr. Burton, your work is very powerful. And I wanted to say this when I think about you as an anthropologist, the power of being able to interpret the words of ancestors, make those ancestors' words live, which gives us some guidance in terms of how we need to approach this time right now in terms of strategizing and creating tactics to and creating new ways of insurgency. And so I'm going to leave it at that. Leave it at that, and let Jomo deliver us.
Absolutely. If we could give some love to Dr. Burton and Dr. Calamari for their comments. Apologies, but we don't have time for questions. But excitingly, this is not the last time that you will get an opportunity to be in conversation with these two giants. So just real quick before we close, we want to just greet folks with Black August Resistance. This year we mark 46 years of the commemoration, and we have a series of Friday workshops that we will be doing around different themes, really around the theme of repression and how we need to fight back. Oh, where did my screen go? Let me get this back up there for y'all.
Let me slip in something right quick.
No, now we gotta go.
His book has been banned in New York, Florida, Michigan, and California. Contraband.
All right. You rambunctious today. All right, sorry, last bit, and then like I said, we'll get us on to courses. So again, next this coming Friday, we'll be celebrating the anniversary of Dr. Mutulu Shakur's birth with a webinar, New African Anti-Fascism, the Political Organizing of Dr. Mutulu Shakur, featuring Dr. Kwame Calamari, will go more into his own history of political organizing against COINTELPRO, and along with Dr. Baba AK, and we'll be joined by Susan Rosenberg. And then on the 15th, we have Black Revolutionary Walter Rodney and George Jackson, Malcolm X in conversation with Dr. CBS, Hiram Rivera, and Musa. And then we have Dr. Burton back against, no, wait, which one are you on? You're in one of these, are you not? The Black Against Empire, right? Black Against Empire, opposing genocide from Attica to Haiti to Palestine and beyond. So we'll have a part 2 to this conversation, and so we want to invite you all to join us. And then our last one, we'll close out with looking at the legacy of Robert and Mabel Williams, particularly looking at the book, the memoirs of Robert and Mabel Williams, and we'll be joined again by Baba AK and Dr. Gloria House. So that is what we're up to for Black August. You can grab everything on the link tree. Hopefully a comrade has put it in the chat, and we have reached completion of our summer school. So want to give gratitude to Zalika, who's been hiding in the background, whose idea this was, who helped make this happen. So we could give some love to Zalika in the chat, as well as we want to give gratitude and thanks to Felicia, our National Information Coordinator, who has been also helping to hold down registration. If you ever got an email and got materials, that was Felicia doing that. So thank you to these two powerful New Africans for helping to create 6 weeks of an amazing course. Again, folks can find all of the lectures from this series up on the BAM YouTube channel. And I believe that is it. So we are going to say thank you and good night. And we're going to make our transition over to the courses. You all are invited to join us over in the courses because we've opened it up this last day. So you're invited to join one of the 4 courses that are happening around Intro to Black Studies, Black Feminism, Black Land, and join us. Rice wants to know, Felicia, will you drop that link so folks can jump over, because our instructors are waiting on us and we don't want to have a rebellion on our last day.
Man, by any means necessary.
Yes, by any means necessary. All right, the link is coming. And once the link get dropped, we're going to close here and make our way over to the school. Again, thank you all for joining and being part of this attempt to really break free Black studies and bring it back to the community for the sake of our self-determination. So with that, we're going to say Black August resistance and free the land, free the land, free the land by any means necessary.